Is the mic fine where it is, or should I? It's good right there. Okay. So tell me when. Om tava kathamritam tapta jivanam kavibididitam kalmashavaham shravanamangalam shrimadatatam bhuvi ganantiye bhurida janaha. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. A heads up for our next class. Our next class is going to be next Wednesday, November 12th. Okay? That's the last class in November. It's going to be a fun class, I promise. We are continuing to discuss the entry from December 14th, 1882. One of the people who attends my class, Geeta Stevens from San Diego, she pointed out that there might be something a little confusing about even the Bengali original Kathamrita, because in all these sections, at the top of each page, there's a date listed. And the date listed is December 14th, 1882. And that's what I emphasized last time in the last class. And I pointed out the discrepancy with Nikhilanandaji's translation, because he just has broadly December 1882 without the date 14th. And what I thought was that was a mistake. Maybe he was using an earlier edition or something, but that it should be December 14th. What she was saying is that even in the original Bengali, even though at the top of the page it says December 14th, in the entry itself it doesn't specify 14th. It just says December 1882. So it might actually be a mistake in the Bengali Kathamrita, and M didn't actually date it as the 14th. But I don't know. Now I'm completely confused. So if anyone has any insights into this, you can put your comment in the YouTube comments. Okay, but let's continue with this entry, which is either December 1882 or December 14th, 1882. I'm not entirely sure which. This is the beginning of a new section. Remember last time we talked at length about Vidyasagar's, he got upset with God and said, even if God exists, I don't care. I don't want to have anything to do with him because he's a meanie. And so now we're starting a new section. And as usual, there are no section headings that are translated. And so I'm going to read out to you the original Bengali section heading. Sri Ramakrishna o Baburam, Master Prabhuti. Sri Ramakrishna is with Baburam. Baburam is the future Swami Premananda. And I should mention, by the way, today is the birthday of Swami Vijnanandaji Maharaj. Okay, so Sri Ramakrishna is with Baburam and Master M, the author of the Gospel, and others, Prabhuti. Daya o Maya. This is the overarching theme for today's class. We'll be covering a lot of ground, but this is one of the central things we'll be discussing. Daya versus Maya. Okay? He's about to explain what these two terms are and how they're opposites. And then the last section heading is Kotin Shadhun o Ishwar Darshan. Difficult sadhanas, difficult spiritual practices, and the realization of God, Ishwar Darshan, Ishvara Darshana. Okay, what is that difficult sadhana? We're about to find out. This gets really interesting and somewhat provocative. And I understand fully why Nikhilanandaji omitted it. We'll see in a second. Okay, but first, Daya and Maya. Master, meaning Sri Ramakrishna. Remember that Daya, compassion, and Maya, attachment, are two different things. Attachment means the feeling of myness toward one's relatives. It is the love one feels for one's parents, one's brother, one's sister, one's wife, and children. Compassion is the love one feels for all beings of the world. It is an attitude of equality. The word for equality that's being translated as equality is actually samadrishti. Samadrishti. Drishti means vision or sight. And so I think maybe a better translation might be same-sightedness or same vision, something like that. Seeing the same divine in everyone. if you see anywhere an instance of compassion, as in Vidyasagar, right? The Vidyasagar anecdote had just happened, his peak at God. So I think that's why Vidyasagar was on Sri Ramakrishna's mind. So if you see anywhere an instance of compassion, as in Vidyasagar, know that it is due to the grace of God. There are a few translation issues. I'll get to them in a second. Okay. If you see anywhere an instance of compassion, as in Vidyasagar, know that it is due to the grace of God. Through compassion, one serves all beings. Maya also comes from God. Through Maya, God makes one serve one's relatives. But one thing should be remembered. Maya keeps us in ignorance and entangles us in the world, whereas Daya makes our hearts pure and gradually unties our bonds. Okay. There's a lot here. First of all, let me point out a few linguistic things here. Okay. Remember, he starts by saying, remember that Daya, compassion, and Maya, attachment. So look, Nikhilanji is translating Daya here, reasonably, as compassion. Because that is, I think, the most direct translation. The word Daya, you'll find that in most Indian languages, Bengali, Hindi, and it's usually translated as compassion. Now, I want to make a case that maybe a slightly better translation in the context of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings might be something like empathy. Okay. Now, part of the reason why is because Sri Ramakrishna also, as most of us know, anyone who follows any of my classes or talks will know I mention this a lot. He also taught, he said, one day he's talking about one of the Vaishnava practices being compassion, and he uses that word, Daya. Okay, Vaishnavas say you should be compassionate toward other creatures. And then he goes into a state of ecstasy and he says, who are we to practice compassion? We are worms crawling on the earth, right? Compassion, I think the suggestion is that compassion implies a standpoint of superiority over the people you're exercising compassion toward. You're putting yourself on a pedestal in a way, even if only implicitly or subtly. And he says, no, for us human beings, there's no question of compassion. There is only Shiva Jnane Jivir Seva. There is only the spirit or attitude of serving others in a spirit of worship by trying to see the same divine in everyone. So this is what I think he means by samadrishti, that term samadrishti, which, as I said, I think it's a little misleading to translate it as an attitude of equality. It's not quite that. It's you serve others in a spirit of worship by seeing the same divine in everyone. That's, in that sense, samadrishti. Okay. So that's why I'm inclined to translate Daya as empathy, okay, rather than compassion. Empathy, I don't think has that feeling of that structure of superiority. Yeah.
The only thing is that compassion seems to imply that you're going to do something. There's an action involved in compassion. Of course, it means at first you see something, but empathy just doesn't.
Oh yeah. Let's say that
empathy
again.
doesn't necessarily imply an action. It's just that
Right.
you're.
Okay, that's
So
an
that's
interesting
why I
point.
think
Yeah, let me
compassion is-
repeat it for those online who might not have heard the first part. This gentleman, Narayana, was saying that in English at least, the term compassion seems to imply action. You act on your compassion as opposed to empathy, where you might just be empathizing with someone but not acting. That's not obvious to me. It's not obvious to me that compassion implies entails or implies action, whereas empathy doesn't. I think either attitude, whether it's empathy or compassion, may or may not issue an action. That's the sense I get. But I mean, other people can chime in on that as well. Okay, yeah, but whatever word that you're comfortable with. Okay, so let's look at his teaching a little bit. Oh, another thing I wanted to say, translation issue. Toward the middle of what I read. If you see anywhere an instance of compassion, as in Vidyasagar, know that it is due to the grace of God. Okay? Here in the translation, we're led to assume, I think, right, that Sri Ramakrishna is using two different words here. One for compassion, the other for grace of God, right? You might be inclined to think that. In fact, look at the original. Karu bhitor jodi দয়া দেখো যেমন বিদ্যাসাগরের সে জানবে ঈশ্বরের দয়া. Notice, I mean, even those who don't know Bengali, you'll hear the word Daya repeated twice here. It's very interesting. Actually, what Sri Ramakrishna is saying is, if you ever find Daya in anybody, know that to be the Daya of God, which has a completely different meaning from the English. Do you see? The English, remember, if you see anywhere an instance of compassion, as in Vidyasagar, know that it is due to the grace of God. It makes it seem as if Vidyasagar and other compassionate people, they have compassion because of the grace of God. But the grace of God is not mentioned at all. There are different words in Indian languages. Kripa, okay, Karuna. But here, it's the same word, Daya. So this has it has a very different meaning, it seems to me. Anytime you see Daya in any human being, know that to be a manifestation of divine empathy, divine compassion. Okay, and there are a few scriptural references here that I think of. One is Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, where this is one of the verses that Sri Ramakrishna himself often recited. If you see any special manifestation in anybody, of anything, if they're extremely good at anything, whether it's cooking or science or singing or whatever, know that in that person there's a special manifestation of me. And so I think in the same way, when you see somebody exhibiting some kind of spiritual or moral quality, that's actually a reflection of God's own supreme qualities. Okay. Another scripture I'm reminded of is the Chandi. One of the 4 hymns that we sing here on Saturdays from the Chandi. Is that long, one of the most famous parts of the Chandi, Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu. So, O Divine Mother, you are, and then it goes through this list of different qualities in people that we see around us. One of them is Daya Rupena Samsita, Namastasyai, 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 Namo Namaha. So, wherever I see Daya in other human beings, actually, O Mother, that's you, manifest in the form of Daya. Okay. And Sri Ramakrishna, of course, knew the Chandi well. So I wonder whether he's thinking of that as well. Okay, so that's an important linguistic point that I wanted to make. Now, what is he saying about Maya and Daya? One thing you might be puzzled about or maybe uneasy about by this teaching might be like the vast majority of people in the world are householders. They've got relatives, they've got family members and partners and kids. And so he's lumping all of that under Maya and saying that's selfish attachment. And that might be hard for some people to hear. And so I think it's worth reflecting on why he says it. It seems to me that from the standpoint of Hinduism, that even householder life it's meant to be part of our spiritual journey, okay? And in what sense? Here's how I see it. We begin very selfish. I mean, typically, unless you're already born a saint or whatever, but typically you're born extremely selfish. You're very self-centered. You care only about yourself. Okay. When one enters the householder stage, the idea seems to be that now you need to expand yourself, your ego, your care to encompass another human being, namely your partner, your spouse. Then they have kids. What happens? You expand it even further to encompass your children. Right? But it seems to me that then family life that can't be the be-all and the end-all. It's more like a training ground. You're learning how to expand the self beyond, how to expand it basically in general. So the first step is expanding beyond yourself to include your partner. Then you include your children. And ideally, I think the goal is to encompass the entire world. Swami Turiyanandaji, when he was growing up, his mother was very pious and very spiritual. And this is noted in his biography. It's very interesting that when he was growing up, the way that his mother raised him, it's mentioned that she would invite all the kids in the neighborhood and feed them all together along with her son in a big row. And she would show no special treatment toward her own children. People didn't even know who her own kids were, in that way. So that's just an example of this samadrishti, it seems to me. Right? She's a mother, she's a householder, but so spiritual that she evolved to that point. Okay. So I think that's something that we should keep in mind. Another question that might come up is, well, why? What makes it selfish or somehow less spiritual to love your partner or your kid? Well, the whole point is we love them more than everyone else, right? That's the point. We don't care about other people's children as much as we do about our own, right? Which means there's still an element of me and mine there. There's still an element of selfishness there. Okay. Let's continue. Sri Ramakrishna says, God cannot be realized without purity of heart. One receives the grace of God by subduing the passions, lust, anger, and greed. Then one sees God. I tried many things in order to conquer lust. Okay, now we get to the interesting part of the class. Okay, so there's a lot here. Okay, first of all, look here. God cannot be realized without purity of heart. One receives the grace of God by subduing the passions, lust, anger, and greed. Notice he's using the grace of God, the same phrase, except here, what's the term used? Chitta shuddhi na hole bhagavan darshan hoy na, kam, krodh, lobh, eshob joy korle, tobe tar kripa hoy, tokhon darshan hoy. He's using the word kripa. That's the standard word, one of the standard words in Bengali and other Indian languages for grace. So here, this is the right translation for kripa. One receives the grace of God by subduing the passions, lust, anger, and greed. I have a very subtle quibble here with the translation. I think one might be misled into thinking from the sentence that if you subdue the passions, only by subduing lust, anger, and greed, do you earn the grace of God, something like that. So one receives the grace of God by subduing the passions, lust, anger, and greed. I don't think that's quite right. Kam, krodh, lobh, kama, krodha, lobha, lust, anger, greed. Eshob joy korle tobe ta kripa hoy. Tobe. The Bengali grammar here is a little bit different. Once you have conquered these things, only when one has conquered these things is it possible to receive God's grace, something like that. And you might think, well, what's the difference? Well, grace is not something that you can earn. You don't put in a certain amount of effort and then you get God's grace and you go and you say, hey, now give me my grace. That's not the way that grace works. It's undeserved by definition, right? So I think that in the Bengali you get that idea that grace is always undeserved, but you have to prepare the ground as much as you can. Now, then we get to, it's very interesting. Then he says, okay, so one receives the grace of God by subduing the passions, lust, anger, and greed. Then one sees God. I tried many things in order to conquer lust. Okay, here, let me read the passage in Bengali, and then we can talk about it a little bit. Tomader oti gujjo kotha bolchi. Actually, there's a missing sentence right before he says, I tried many things in order to conquer lust. Okay, what does he say? Tomader oti gujjo kotha bolchi. I'm now going to tell you something very secret. Okay, so why does he omit that? Well, we'll see in a second. Okay, কাম জয় করবার জন্য আমি অনেক কাণ্ড করেছিলাম, which is faithfully translated as, I tried many things. Not just many things, অনেক কাণ্ড করেছিলাম in Bangla means I went to extremes, did some pretty wild things in order to conquer lust. That's more or less literally what অনেক কাণ্ড করেছিলাম means. And then he says, and these sentences completely omitted. Okay. এমনকি আনন্দ আসনের চারিদিকে জয় কালী বলে অনেকবার প্রদক্ষিণ করেছিলাম. Okay. He's giving an example of the lengths he went to conquer lust. See, it's funny. If you just read Niklajanji's, then one sees God. I tried many things in order to conquer lust. And then when I was 10 or 11 years old and lived at Kamarpur, it goes on to a different subject. So it's very abrupt and there's clearly something missing. So what's missing? Well, here's what's missing. He says, here's an example of the lengths I went. Okay. In Tantra, there's a special kind of very difficult, left-handed, seemingly, spiritual practice called Ananda Asana. Ananda Asana. Okay? Ananda means bliss. Asana means asana. Okay. And it means a man and woman procreating, copulating. Okay? And the practices, he's saying, is they are doing that, and he is circumambulating them repeatedly, and he keeps saying over and over again, Joy Kali, to overcome lust. So this Ananda Asana, how did I find out? The M Trust edition of the Kathamrita, the other translation that's available, that has a footnote explaining that. Ananda Asana. Even in the, like a lot of people don't know. I asked a Bengali person who knows Bengali, very well. It's their native language. And I read out that sentence. Emon ki Ananda Asana charidike jay. I said, what is Ananda Asana? She had no idea. So it's not like obvious. This is something that tantric practitioners, people who have some knowledge of tantra, may know. But it's not common knowledge. That Ananda Asana means that. And so Sri Ramakrishna, this is one of the ways that he completely conquered lust, actually. Can you give him the mic? One second. Yeah, but still, for the online people.
Yeah, under the direction of that lady guru,
Bhairavi Brahmani.
Bhairavi Brahmani.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He didn't just do it on his own out of the blue. He was instructed on how to follow this tantric thing.
Right. So thank you for mentioning that. I probably would have forgotten if you hadn't said that. So one possibility, is that what he's referring to here is something mentioned in the Leela Prasanga, Sharananji's biography of Sri Ramakrishna, in the context of his tantric practices that he conducted under Bhairavi Brahmani. And I'm going to read to you the passage. And it might be, I'm not positive, but you can also give your input on this. Having thus initiated me into Purnabhisheka, which means full initiation into tantric rites, Sri Ramakrishna speaking, the Brahmani made me perform innumerable rites. I don't recall all the details now, but I do remember the day I witnessed the union of a man and a woman. I perceived only the divine sport of Shiva and Shakti and went into Samadhi. When I regained outer consciousness, the Brahmani told me, "My child, you have attained perfection in an extremely difficult esoteric sadhana and are established in the divine mode. This is the last sadhana of the heroic mode of worship." So I think there's a strong possibility that the incident he's referring to here in the gospel is this incident from his tantric practices under Bhairavi Brahmani. But it's not obvious to me that it has to be. Because the Jai Kali, repeating Jai Kali and circumambulating around the Ananda Asana is not really mentioned here. So that's what makes me hesitate to say that this must be the incident that he's referring to in the gospel. It might be a separate incident, Lord knows. Okay. Let's continue. He says, when I was 10 or 11 years old and lived at Kamarpukur, I first experienced samadhi. I want to point out something briefly before I move on, which is that he says, he doesn't actually use the word samadhi here. He says, oi avastha. That state happened to me again. And then in the Bengali, in parentheses, it says shamadhi avastha. So it's specifying that the avastha was samadhi. So that's just a small point. So I first experienced samadhi. As I was passing through a paddy field, I saw something and was overwhelmed. Let's pause here. What did he see? Yeah, very good. Exactly. Every morning we read this, don't we? Wait, when do we read it? Even the white cranes against the backdrop of dark clouds. Yeah, it's one of the once a week things, yeah? Stotra Dashakam or whatever. Yeah. So he's walking in a paddy field. He looks up, dark clouds, and then he sees this group of beautiful white cranes against the backdrop of dark clouds. And he goes into samadhi, and he drops the puffed rice that he was holding in his hands. So that's, I think, pretty clearly what he's referring to. But it's interesting that he just says here, I saw something. Mat diye jete jete ja darshan korlam tate bishol hoyechilam. Ja darshan korlam. He said, I saw something. Yeah. So, but the details are specified in Sharananji's biography. Okay. And another thing that's important here is, which is significant, I think, is that the very first time he experienced samadhi, it was not going to a temple and seeing an image of God, thinking of God, seeing natural beauty, right? I think it's very important. I think it's significant that he's showing us that one of the portals to spiritual transcendence is nature and appreciating the divine beauty of nature. And in a way, I was thinking post-Enlightenment in the West, at least, churches are quite sparsely attended these days in many parts of the world. In Europe, it's even worse than in the US, apparently. That's what I hear or what I've read. But what's filling the void, that spiritual void? Things like museums and even rock concerts. With these there's somebody here who's a big fan of the Grateful Dead who tells me how it's like a group experience, right? But there's something bordering on the religious and spiritual in these kinds of group venues. They're not traditionally religious, but these are now in this post-Enlightenment age where many people find it hard to stomach God. They're getting spirituality in different ways, and one of them is artistic beauty. So Sri Ramakrishna, I think, acknowledges that. Okay. Then he says, there are certain characteristics of God vision. He's talking about God realization here. God vision is Ishwar darshan, Ishvara darshana. Okay. One sees light, feels joy, and experiences the upsurge of a great current in one's chest, like the bursting of a rocket. Interesting. ঈশ্বর দর্শনের কতকগুলি লক্ষণ আছে, জ্যোতি দেখা যায়, আনন্দ হয়, বুকের ভিতর তুবড়ির মতো গুড়গুড় করে মহাবায়ু ওঠে. So the one thing I wanted to bring your attention to is for the word for great current. A great current is mahavayu. And one thing that's interesting is that he uses this term frequently in the gospel. And on many occasions, Nikhilanji leaves it as Mahavayu. Here, for some reason, he translates it as a great current. It's not obvious that it's the same term, Mahavayu. I'll give you an example. From a much later entry from the Gospel, August 9th, 1885, Sri Ramakrishna says, a person's spiritual consciousness is not awakened unless his kundalini is aroused. The kundalini dwells in the Mooladhara. When it is aroused, it passes along the Sushumna nerve, goes through the centers of Swadhisthana, Manipura, and so on, and at last reaches the head. This is called the movement of Mahavayu, the spiritual current. It culminates in Samadhi. So I think bringing this passage into this context is very helpful here. This Mahavayu is a term used in the context of Kundalini Yoga. And when you awaken this serpent energy, this Kundalini, this current of Mahavayu goes up like an electric current through the different chakras and then finally culminating in Samadhi. Okay, Mahavayu. Wind. Yeah, wind, but current in a broader way. And so here, clearly, it's not wind, but a spiritual current. Yeah. Okay, and then the next day, Baburam and Ramdayal returned to Kolkata. M spent the day and the night with the master. And there's one little sentence missing, tiny little detail. Shedin tini Thakur baritei prasad pailen. That day, M took his prasad, meaning the offered food, the sanctified food, at Sri Ramakrishna's place with Sri Ramakrishna. That's the sentence that's missing. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next entry, and we're going to attempt to finish it. We have another half hour, it should be fine. Okay, this entry says in Nikhilanji's December 1882, again, without any specific date. And again, confusingly, in the Bengali, at the top of page 128, it's written December 14th, 1882. Is that a mistake on the side of the Bengali? I don't know. Okay, but it's the start of a new chapter. Chapter 9, Nobam Porichid. The title of the chapter is Dokhineshware Marwari Bhaktagan Sange Sri Ramakrishna. Okay. That means in Dokhineshwar, Sri Ramakrishna is speaking to Marwari devotees. Marwari means it's a particular kind of person who tends to work in business. Okay, their field is business. They make a lot of money. Okay. Now, let's read. It was afternoon. The master was sitting in his room at Dokhineshwar with M and one or two other devotees. Several Marwari devotees arrived and saluted the master. And there's a missing sentence here, tiny little detail. Tahara Kolikatai Babsha Koren. They do business in Kolkata. This is significant for what follows, actually, because Sri Ramakrishna could tell immediately. Then, they requested Sri Ramakrishna to give them spiritual instruction. He smiled. And his response is very interesting. Master, to the Marwadi devotees, you see, the feeling of I and mine is the result of ignorance. But to say, O God, thou art the doer, all these belong to thee, is the sign of knowledge. How can you say such a thing as mine? The superintendent of the garden says, this is my garden. But if he is dismissed because of some misconduct, then he does not have the courage to take away even such a worthless thing as his mango wood box. Anger and lust cannot be destroyed. Turn them toward God. If you must feel desire and temptation, then desire to realize God. Feel tempted by him. Discriminate and turn the passions away from worldly objects. When the elephant is about to devour a plantain tree in someone's garden, the mahout strikes it with his iron-tipped goad. Okay, here, I wanted to mention a couple things. First of all, linguistically, again, just in terms of translation, he says, anger and lust cannot be destroyed. So the two terms here obviously are kama and krodha, right? And that's fine. Now, Amar Bagan, Kam Krodh. Okay, then, if you must feel desire, turn them toward, anger and lust cannot be destroyed, turn them toward God. If you must feel desire and temptation, what do you think, guess what the word for temptation is here? If you must feel desire and temptation, then desire to realize God, feel tempted by him. Any guesses? Anyone who knows Indian languages? No, okay. Huh? Kama is desire, or lust, yeah. So that's already taken. But it's one of the standard six in the set of six enemies. It's lobha. Usually lobha is translated as greed. Even Niklanji in other places will translate lobha as greed. Here, for some reason, he renders it as temptation. If you must feel desire, and I think it's better to say greed. If you must feel desire and greed, kama and lobha, কামনা লোভ করতে হয় তো ঈশ্বরকে পাওয়ার কামনা লোভ করো. He says, if you must feel desire and greed, then desire to realize God. Feel greedy for God, right? Feel greed toward God. I must have him, that kind of idea. This practice is very interesting. This is one of Sri Ramakrishna's distinctive teachings, that you can't just get rid of things like lust and anger. So what should you do? Give them a Godward turn. Mor firiye dao. This is the expression in Bangla. Ishwara dike mor firiye dao. Turn these things toward God. And I thought I've thought for a long time that this is a unique practice that Sri Ramakrishna taught that you don't really find explicitly in the traditional scriptures. But then I discovered the following verse, and I've shared this with you before in an earlier gospel class, but I'm going to say it again because I think it's very important. This is from the Bhagavata Purana, a scripture that Sarvadevanji teaches here. 10.29.15, if you want to look it up. 10.29.15 of the Bhagavata Purana. Kamam krodham bhayam sneham aikyam sauhridam evacha nityam harau vidadadho yanti tanmayatam hite. The translation is, people who constantly turn their lust, anger, fear, protective affection, feeling of impersonal oneness or friendship toward Lord Hari, meaning toward Krishna, are sure to become absorbed in the thought of him. So it's an almost exact description of the practice I think that Sri Ramakrishna is talking about. Take that kama, that krodha, that bhayam, and give it a Godward turn. So this is the only scriptural precedent I find for Sri Ramakrishna's very practical teaching. And I think this is one of the reasons that he often says that bhakti yoga is the path for this age of Kali Yuga, where we're so materialistic, so closely identified with our bodies. Because I think what he's saying is that bhakti yoga is just much easier and more practicable for more people, for most people. just in terms of practice. It's easy to talk about Advaita and almost impossible to practice it. Whereas with bhakti, the beauty of it is you don't have to, just eliminate your desires, your worldly attachments and all that. Turn them toward God. So it's more natural. So instead of repressing or suppressing your worldly attachments and desires, you sublimate them, right? I think that's what this practice is about. It's about sublimation rather than suppression or repression. Okay, so I think that's psychologically also very healthy for most people. Okay, so let's continue. You are merchants. You know how to improve your business gradually. So see how it's important that they're doing business, right? Because he's explicitly bringing it up. You are merchants. You know how to improve your business gradually. Some of you start with a castor oil factory. After making some money at that, you open a cloth shop. In the same way, one makes progress toward God. It may be that you go into solitude now and then and devote more time to prayer. But you must remember that nothing can be achieved except in its proper time. Some persons must pass through many experiences and perform many worldly duties before they can turn their attention to God. So they have to wait a long time. If an abscess is lanced before it is soft, the result is not good. The surgeon makes the opening when it is soft and has come to a head. Once a child said to its mother, this is one of my favorite stories of his. Once a child said to its mother, "Mother, I'm going to sleep now. Please wake me up when I feel the call of nature." "My child," said the mother, "when it is time for that, you will wake up yourself. I shan't have to wake you." It's a very funny little story. And one thing that's missing from the translation is right after he says it, the Bengali says, "Shokoler hasho," which means everybody laughs, because it's quite funny. And some of the humor might be lost because call of nature is kind of a euphemism here. It really means number two, okay? Call of nature, I think, is more general. It can encompass number one and number two. But this is very specifically number two. That's what makes it funny. It's called scatological humor, guys. Sri Ramakrishna was an expert in it. Okay. So what is Sri Ramakrishna saying here? Look, remember the context. These Marwari bhaktas who are, all about money, 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 very worldly, they come to this saint, God himself, and they say, "Give us some spiritual instructions." So what's the first thing he does? He smiles because he can see right into their souls, right? And that's why I think for them, he's saying, okay, easy there. Take things gradually, because if you try to do things too quickly, you might actually fall flat on your face, which is not a good idea. Gradually. Spiritual life is about taking things gradually. And this is a long way of saying, he has this great teaching that he sometimes says in Bengali, bhog anto na hole tag ashana, which means until you have passed through the end of enjoyments, you will not feel the true spirit of renunciation and detachment. You have to pass through these enjoyments. He himself demonstrated that at a certain point in his life. He had this desire to wear a very expensive shawl. So he asked Motur Babu, his wealthy patron, "Get me a very expensive shawl." He got them this super fancy shawl. He wore it. And he said, "Oh, mind, this is a super fancy shawl." And then the next moment, he goes, "What is this? I don't need it." Throws it on the ground. I think even spits on it and starts trampling on it. And Motur Babu, "Whoa, that's a very expensive shawl." And he takes it away. So he did this a few times, actually. He did it with a hookah, too. Or a Hubble bubble. He said, "Mind, this is a Hubble bubble." And then he does the same thing, tosses it. Okay, so what's the idea here? Well, we learn through experience. That's why Swami Vivekananda used to say, the secret of life is not enjoyment, but education through experience. Education through experience. And that's one of the best things about Vedanta. It's one of the things that most attracted me to Vedanta, is that it's not a preachy religion that says you're a sinner and stop doing this. Vedanta says, oh, you want to do that? Go ahead and do it, but do it with your eyes open. And see if you get out of that experience what you were looking for. That's the Vedantic approach. It's very mature, very loving and kind and empathic, actually. Right? I mean, it's a very different kind of spiritual orientation, actually. And look at Sri Ramakrishna. He's like, you've got a little bit more enjoyment to do. Don't feel bad about it. Don't be racked with guilt. Don't tell yourself, I should be doing X, Y, and Z. Look at these saintly people who are not in business and I'm just a worldly person. No, go through it. That's your yoga in this life, at least for now. Sri Aurobindo put the same thing differently by saying all life is yoga. All life. He didn't say only what you do in a yoga studio or in the shrine is yoga. He says literally everything is yoga. Even the dumb stuff you do, even the huge mistakes, even the so-called sins are yoga. How are they yoga? How are those things yoga? Because they're bringing you closer to God because you learn from your experiences. You don't just learn from your positive experiences. You learn we learn more usually from our negative experiences. Oh, boy, I did that. I made such a big mistake and now I'm paying for it. I better not do that again, right? You learn. And what happens as a result? You take that many steps closer to God, right? So that's what I see Sri Ramakrishna saying here. And I think the danger of jumping the gun in spiritual life is that you end up potentially spiritually bypassing. There's this term that's becoming more popular, trending these days, spiritual bypassing. You're dealing with some really difficult issue in your worldly life. Maybe you lose a loved one, maybe you lost your job, maybe you're dealing with mental health issues. And what do? You start coming to the church or the temple very, very frequently. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, and that could actually be good. But you have to do it mindfully. And if you're doing it as an escape from what's happening in your life, that's called spiritual bypassing. If you're escaping into spirituality, quote unquote spirituality, as a way of evading your worldly problems, the things that are afflicting you, that are causing you difficulties, that's spiritual bypassing, right? But if you turn to spirituality as a way of confronting head on those issues that you're facing, then that's a different thing. If you've lost a loved one and you come to temple, the church, and you pray to God, and you cry with tears in your eyes, of course alone, privately, and you express your sorrow to God, that's not spiritual bypassing, right? But if as a way of avoiding dealing with the grief of losing your partner, for instance, or your child, you kind of escape into meditation or something like that, that may not be so productive and it could turn into spiritual bypassing. So I think Sri Ramakrishna may have these things in mind as well. Okay, and now we get to the next section. It's very interesting, this last paragraph. The new section is called Marwari Bhakto o Bapshaya Mittha Kotha, which means these same Marwari devotees, and the topic is they're kind of people who engage in business, whose career is business, tend to have to lie sometimes. They have to be dishonest. They can't always be fully honest. And then Ram Nam Kirtan. Ram Nam, the thing we do here, that was on Saturday. I missed it because I was in San Diego. Ram Nam Kirtan. Ram Nam Kirtana. Okay, taking the name of Rama. Okay, now, the Marwari devotees generally brought offerings of fruit, candy, and other sweets for the master. Here there's a tiny little detail which is a bit different. মারওয়ারি ভক্তরা মাঝে মাঝে ঠাকুরের সেবার জন্য মিষ্টান্নাদি দ্রব্য আনেন, ফল আদি থাল মিছরি ইত্যাদি. Okay, they specify the kind of candy. It says candy and other sweets. This is thal michri. As far as I can tell, this means date palm sugar candy. Date palm, we have it here. Date palm sugar candy. The only reason why I'm slightly hesitant is because it would be a tal michri is, I think, the standard way of saying it in Bengali. Tal means it's like a soft ta, but here it's tal michri. It's aspirated. And so I'm a little puzzled as to what, I think it must mean the same thing, and maybe it's just old Bengali. Tal and tal mean the same thing, date palm, but I'm not sure. And you Bengalis out there can correct me if I'm wrong. And then there's a missing sentence about the same tal michri, about the date palm sugar candy. Tal michri-te golap joler gondo. There's a little scent of rose water in the date palm candy, sugar candy. A little detail there. Okay. Then, let's continue. But Sri Ramakrishna could hardly eat them. He would say, they earn their money by falsehood. I cannot eat their offerings. he said to the Marwadis, "You see, one can't strictly adhere to truth in business. There are ups and downs in business. Nanak once said," Guru Nanak, the founder of Sikhism, "I was about to eat the food of unholy people when I found it stained with blood." A man should offer only pure things to holy men. Now it's back to Sri Ramakrishna. He shouldn't give them food earned by dishonest means. God is realized by following the path of truth. One should always chant his name. Even while one is performing one's duties, the mind should be left with God. Suppose I have a carbuncle on my back. I perform my duties, but the mind is drawn to the carbuncle. It is good to repeat the name of Rama. The same, now quote, "The same Rama who was the son of King Dasharatha has created this world. Again, as spirit, he pervades all beings. He is very near us. He is both within and without." Okay, here again, there are some translation issues. Before I get into them, I wanted to mention this about when he says, even while one is performing one's duties, the mind should be left with God. Suppose I have a carbuncle on my back. I perform my duties, but the mind is drawn to the carbuncle. I think this is very practical advice. No matter what you're doing, try to think of a way of connecting what you're doing to God. Whatever it is. LA, what is LA famous for? For a lot of things, but one of them is like pollution, for instance, but another one is rush hour traffic. Not even rush hour, it's just traffic. Whether it's rush hour or not, there's just traffic. So imagine you're stuck in traffic. There are many ways of dealing with traffic. One is the way that I see many LA drivers dealing with it, which is road rage. And they'll flip the bird at you, and they'll be furious, and they'll be honking, and belligerent, and all sorts of stuff. Now, another attitude is my flipping the bird at the guy in front of me or next to me going to make the traffic get any better or make me get to my destination any sooner? No. So why don't I, listen to spiritual bhajans on through Spotify or whatever in your car. You can listen to spiritual music. You can do japa while you're in the car, stuck in traffic. You can take the name of God, repeat the mantra mentally, right? These are ways of, always try to think of everything, whatever the circumstances. Say you're cooking. Why don't you do japa while you're cooking? What if you're exercising? Why don't you try to do japa when you're exercising? Right? There's so many ways. Some people think that, I don't have time to do my spiritual practice. What they mean is, because they're busy in their household duties, they don't have that much time to dedicate to meditation in the morning and the evening. That's fine. But what are you doing during your household duties? Why don't you try to connect what you're doing to the divine? Either by doing mantra japa, by listening to spiritual music, by singing, for instance. There's so many things that one can do, I think, throughout the course of the day. So I think that's what Sri Ramakrishna has in mind here. He's speaking to Madhavadi devotees who are extremely busy with their business and their family, right? I mean, he's specifically telling them, even when you're doing those things, try to think of God, okay? And then we get to this translation issue, which is quite fascinating. Why is it? Oh, yeah, here it is. Okay. So, okay. What I just read to you, it's in quotes, but there's no footnote explaining where the quote is from. And it's not written out as verses or as a song. It's just written as part of the paragraph. The same Rama who was the son of King Dasharatha has created this world. Again, as spirit, capital S spirit, he pervades all beings. He is very near us. He is both within and without. In fact, let me read to you the Bangla because it's quite different. Je Ram Dasharather ছেলে আবার জগৎ সৃষ্টি করেছেন আর সর্বভূতে আছেন আর অতি নিকটে আছেন অন্তরে বাইরে ওহি রাম দশরথ even though it's Bengali, this is actually Hindi. There are 4 lines taken from a Kabir song, what's called a doha, D-O-H-A, okay, which are completely omitted. You would have no idea, or some people might, but it's certainly not obvious, that he's actually quoting a Kabir doha. He's paraphrasing it. And he's reading it out, he's reciting it in Hindi. Okay? So I'm going to recite it as Hindi, even though my Hindi is terrible. I'm going to try my best. ओही राम दशरथ की बेटा, ओही राम घट घट में लेटा, ओही राम जगत पशेरा, ओही राम सबसे न्यारा. Okay, 4 lines. Now, before he directly quotes those lines from the Kabir song, okay, he says a bunch of things. And so this is not at all clear from Nikhilanji's translation, that Sri Ramakrishna is first saying things about Rama, the different ways that you can think about Rama. And then he goes on to quote 4 lines from the Kabir song, okay? So let me first translate to you what Sri Ramakrishna is saying about the different ways we can think about Rama. He's saying, Ramnam Kara Bhesh, you should do Ramnam, like the thing that we did on Saturday. Take Rama's name. And then he goes on to explain, what is the secret of Rama? Who is Rama? Je Ram Dasharatha Chile, that Rama who is the son of King Dasharatha. Abar Jagat Shishti Korechen. That same Rama is the creator of this entire world. He rules this entire world. Ar Sharbhavute Achen, and he dwells in all living beings. Ar Oti Nikote Achen, and he is closer to us than our own jugular vein. I just quoted the Quran there, but that's not really what he said. But Ar Oti Nikote Achen, he means he is extremely close to us. He is very near and dear to us. Okay, Ontore Baire, Ontore Baire. He is within us. Ontore Baire. He is also outside, transcendental. After all that, that's Sri Ramakrishna himself saying all those things. That's not a quotation. Then he goes on to recite those 4 lines of Hindi from the Kabir Doha. Okay. Now, with the help of our friend Suman here, even though he also doesn't know Hindi that well, so this is kind of a blind leading the blind situation, but he's a good researcher. So he found the original Kabir Doha, and it's actually not 4 lines, but 8 lines. And this gets very interesting. So let me now read out to you the 8 lines in the original Kabir Doha, and then we can talk about it, because it's extremely interesting from a philosophical and spiritual standpoint. Ek Ram Dasharatha ka beta. Okay, so the one Rama, Eka Rama, is the son of, the child of King Dasharatha. Okay, that's more or less what Sri Ramakrishna says. Ek Ram Ghata Ghata me baitha. Slightly different, because Sri Ramakrishna says, Ohi Ram Ghata Ghata me leta. This is baitha. So this one Rama, who is the son of Dasharatha, is also dwelling in every ghata. Ghata literally means pot or jug or something. But I think in the context of Kabir songs, it tends to mean in the soul or mind of every creature, or in the heart of everyone. Okay. And then Ek Ram ka sakal pasara. Ek Ram ka sakal pasara. So Sri Ramakrishna's reciting is Ohi Ram jagat pashera. Okay, almost the same. But so this Rama, who is sakal pasara, this same Ram permeates this entire universe. So it's immanent, I-M-M-A-N-E-N-T, A-N-E-N-T, right? Yeah, immanent. Am I dropping an? Yeah. I-M-M-A-N-E-N-T, yeah, okay. So immanent. That same Rama is immanent in everything in this world, as opposed to imminent. Once in Berkeley, there was a professor who was teaching us Hegel. So this guy's supposed to be smart. And then he writes on the board, and Hegel's all about immanence with an A. That's one of the big terms he uses. In German, it's Immanenz. And so I-M-M-A-N-E-N-C-E. And then below it, he writes I-M-M-I-N-E-N-C-E. This is a smart professor at Berkeley. And he looks at the board. He goes, one of these words means soon. Okay, so which is just weird. So the second one with the I-M-M-I-N-E-N-T just means soon. But this is his great insight that explaining Hegel to us. Okay, so anyway, that's why I'm careful here. Okay, now, Ek Ram ka sakal pasara. Okay, so that same one Rama is permeating everything in the universe. And then the 4th line, Ek Ram tribhuvan se nyara. Okay, that same Eka Rama, that same Rama is Nyara totally separate from or distinct from, transcendent to this entire world. So it's meant to be kind of paradoxical, right? On the one hand, God is the child of a king, little kid, a little 5-year-old scurrying around. That same Rama the paradox is, he is dwelling in the hearts of every human being, of all beings, not just human beings, but all living beings. That same Rama permeates this entire world. And the very same Rama is transcendent, radically beyond everything in this world, right? That's the paradox. And then Kabir adds these next 4 lines. Sri Ramakrishna doesn't mention the last 4 lines. And I'm going to suggest that there's a deep philosophical and spiritual reason why he omits those 4 lines. He may not have even known them, but he might have. But let's see what those 4 lines are, and then I'm going to, of course, come back to Vijnana Vedanta. Okay. Teen Ram ko sab koi dhayave, Chatutta Ram ko marma na pave, Chautha chari jo pancham dhayave, Kahe Kabir soham ko pave. Okay. What's he saying here? Teen Ram ko sab koi dhayave. Hold on. Okay. So it's saying everyone meditates on these 3 Ramas, the ones that were explained earlier in the previous verses, the ones that Sri Ramakrishna actually recites, the son of Dasharatha and so on. Everyone meditates on these 3 Ramas, but no one understands the essence of the fourth Rama. The 4th Rama is the one that's radically transcendent. Remember, the last one, Jnana, the one that's not immanent, but completely beyond everything, okay? And then he adds, you might think, okay, that's enough. So he stops at, because remember, in Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, Turiya, the 4th, is considered to be the highest, non-dual Brahman, beyond the 3 states of waking, dream, and deep sleep. Kabir goes even further. He outdoes even the Advaita Vedanta. He says, he who leaves the 4th, so the Hindi here is, Chautha chari jo pancham dhayave. So that person who even goes beyond the 4th, that Turiya, Chatutta, and meditates on the 5th. I was throwing, why not a 6th and a 7th? Anyway, but he stops at Pancham. So, and meditates on the 5th. Kahe Kabir soham ko pave. That person, says Kabir, attains me. And he doesn't mean Kabir the poet. He means me in the sense of God. That person alone attains the supreme. Now, this is interesting because if you look at the Doha as a whole, all 8 lines of Kabir's song, what you find, at least as far as I can tell, is that there's a clear hierarchy here, right? And so he's saying, look, yeah, Rama, many people refer to Rama in different ways. There's Rama, the child of King Dasharatha. There's Rama, who's the creator of this world. There's the Rama who is indwelling all beings. There's the Rama who is... And Kabir says, yeah. I mean, I know that a lot of people talk about Rama in those ways, as an avatara, incarnation, and so on. That's not the real Rama. That's not the highest divine, the highest supreme. The highest supreme is the radically transcendent, the 5th, beyond all of these. Okay? So I kind of, sometimes in the gospel, Sri Ramakrishna talks about Kabir, and he kind of says Kabir leans in a strongly Advaitic direction. And that he sometimes will even put down devotees, bhaktas, who like to worship Krishna as an incarnation. And Kabir says in a song, he kind of makes fun of the gopis, like clapping their hands like monkeys when they're with Krishna and so on. And so maybe he's in one of those moods in this song where he's kind of dismissing all the potential kind of more theistic understandings of God, of Rama, and saying that's not the highest Rama. Actually, the highest Rama is the strictly nirguna nirakara, formless, not just formless, because even the formless can be personal. But it seems like what Kabir is saying here is that it's the highest divine is impersonal, attributeless. You can't say anything about this God. Even if you say God is loving, then that's already bringing it down to maybe the 4th rather than the 5th. But he loves this 5th idea, this completely, radically transcendent other divine. Now, what's interesting is, you might ask, well, why does Sri Ramakrishna not mention the second part, the last 4 lines of the song? And another thing is, notice, this is why it's so important to look at the original Bengali here. Look, again, let me read out to you again the English translation, Nikhilanji's translation, then we'll get back to the Bengali. So this is how Nikhilanji does it. It is good to repeat the name of Rama. And then quote, the same Rama who was the son of King Dasharatha has created this world. Again, as spirit. Now here, as spirit is just not in the original Bengali at all. Okay. Again, he pervades all beings. He is very near us. He is both within and without. And then it stops. Chapter ends, and the 4 lines of the Kabir song are omitted. It seems to me that what Sri Ramakrishna is doing here is he was a very subtle literary critic and interpreter of texts, actually. And I think what he's doing here is he's giving a kind of paraphrase or gist of the Kabir lines that he then ends up reciting, which are omitted. So when in Bengali he explains, hey, Rama, you should take Rama's name. And who is Rama? Well, he's all these things. He is the son of King Dasharatha, and so you can worship him as an incarnation. He dwells in the hearts of all living beings as the Antaryami, as the inner controller. He is also so close to us. He is more intimate to us than anyone else in the world. He's our near and dear, our nearest and dearest. And then Antare Baire, he is immanent and he is also transcendent. He is within us, he is also beyond us. And notice that unlike Kabir, Sri Ramakrishna, I think quite conspicuously departs from Kabir. He's not rank ordering them or putting these different forms of Rama on a lower footing than this radically transcendent Nirguna, Nirakara, formless, attributeless Brahman. He's saying all of these are equally real and equally valuable ways of thinking of Rama, of thinking of God. He's saying this from the standpoint of Vijnana Vedanta, I think. So I think he's kind of correcting Kabir here. Kabir's arguable one-sidedness. You can say that at least in this mood, Kabir is being a little bit one-sided in putting the 5th on a pedestal and saying the other 4 forms of Rama, they don't quite measure up to the 5th. The ultimate is the 5th, and the other 4 are lower in some way. Sri Ramakrishna, there's no lower and higher here. How? What's the basis? The basis is a spiritual realization of Vijnana, because the Vijnani, he says, realizes that divine reality which is Nirguna, that 5th of Kabir, the Nirguna Nirakara, formless, attributeless Brahman, is equally Saguna. Brahman and Shakti are inseparable, non-different, like fire and its power to burn. And so he's placing, based on his own spiritual realization, he's realized that the non-dual Brahman that Kabir seems to be extolling and placing on a higher footing is non-different from Shakti, the personal God, who does manifest as different incarnations. So the son of Dasharatha, fully real. You can realize the highest and see the highest in the son of Dasharatha. And that same Shakti is immanent. Sri Ramakrishna says the Vijnani sees that Brahman has become the 24 cosmic principles, which means what? Everything in this world is nothing but divine consciousness. This world is a real manifestation of divine consciousness. So that means that the divine is immanent in this world. Even while being transcendent, Jnara, what Kabir says, the language he uses, Jnara, it's radically transcendent. That too, the Vijnani realizes that too. In the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, he realizes his true nature as non-dual pure consciousness. So he realizes the transcendent 5th aspect of Rama, but he also equally realizes the truth of the immanent and the personal dimension of the same Rama. And he, unlike Kabir, is placing them all on an equal footing and saying they all have equal reality and equal value. So I think this is a very philosophically important teaching that in the English translation, you'll miss it completely. You won't even know that it's a Kabir Doha. You won't know that he's actually giving his own Vijnana Vedanta kind of interpretation, a more liberal interpretation of the Kabir verses. And he conspicuously refrains from rank ordering them and saying that these 3 Ramas are lower than the 5th Rama, which is the highest. No, he's saying they're all equally real. Okay? Questions?
At the end of the Kabir, I heard you read something of the Kabir where it says, and realize me.
Yeah, hum. That's the Hindi word for me.
Yeah. So how does that fit in with what you were saying?
Well, it's just he's basically in that last line. It's like he's speaking in the first person from God's standpoint. It's like in the Gita, Bhagavad Gita. Often Krishna will say, "You come to me. Those who worship God will come to me," and so on. So in that sense, he's not being egoistic and saying they come to me, Kabir, the singer, but it just means God. So it's like God speaking directly. That's how I take it, at least. Is that plausible? Okay, can you give the mic to Suman? Oh, it sounds like Vijnana. Yeah. Oh, I see, in that way. Yeah. Yeah, but this whole thing of putting down I don't want to say putting down, but denigrating the other four Ramas at the expense of the fifth, that doesn't feel very Vijnana to me. Yeah.
Maharaj, Soham, I think he's saying self with the capital S. So
you mean this is like the classic Soham,
Soham,
Saha Aham.
Soham ko pave, right?
Yeah, ko pave. Soham ko pave.
So he attains the self.
Oh, I see. Saha, so that person, hum, ko pave, he attains the hum, the self. Hamsa, do you think, or just hum in the sense of
Soham.
self? No, soham are two different words here, at least written here. It's so as one word, and then it's hum.
Soham ko pave.
Soham ko pave. Saha, hum, ko pave.
Oh, okay.
He attains hum. And I think hum, doesn't hum just mean me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's what, it's a me, actually. Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts about this? Or anything else we've talked about today? No? And online, do you want to check quickly? Okay. Otherwise, we'll just wrap it up. And just remind you, the next gospel class I'll be teaching is next Wednesday, November 12th. And then I run off the next day to the East Coast. Yeah, any questions?
There's one here for you. This person had found a contradiction in the gospel on 23rd of March, 1884, when Vaishnacharyan says, whomever you love the most, think of him as God or Ishta, and love him or her. Thakur says, this is not my belief. Whereas, on 24th May, 1884, Thakur says, even if you worship brick or stone as God, you can see him by grace. Later on, Thakur says, if God can be worshipped on image, then why can't he be worshipped in living form?
Okay, so, I mean, I'd have to look up all the references and all that, but I think I get the gist of the thrust of the question, which is that this person is quoting different teachings of Sri Ramakrishna in different entries from the gospel, and there seems to be an apparent contradiction, because in one place he seems to be saying, it is not my teaching that you can love God, through other beings, something along those lines. But then in other places he's saying, yes, you can. If you can worship God in an image and in a temple, why can't you worship God in a human being, in a living being? And of course, that's one of the keynotes of his teachings, actually. Shiva Jnana Jiva Seva, which I talked about earlier in the class, which is serve others in a spirit of worship by trying to see the divine in living beings, in all living beings. So they're not in an image. And that's what Swami Vivekananda used to call practical Vedanta. So one thing to keep in mind when we see what seem to be contradictions in his teachings, we have to be really careful about looking at context. Whom is he speaking to? Often what you'll find is what he's saying to one person is beneficial to that person. And when he says something that seems to be the opposite, he thinks that that's beneficial to a different person, you know. I'm always reminded of these two direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna who became monks. And one of them had a kind of a temper. He had a hot temper, okay, Niranjananandaji. And one day he's on a boat and somebody starts insulting Sri Ramakrishna. And Niranjanandaji becomes furious. And he threatens to capsize the boat if those people didn't shut up. He was shouting at the people and saying, "Also, I'm going to," you know, and he's a good swimmer, so he's not worried. But the other guys don't know how to swim. They're freaking out. And then he goes and he tells Sri Ramakrishna, "Hey, this is what I did." And he thought he'd be happy that he's protecting his guru and defending his guru. Sri Ramakrishna scolds him. He says, "No, you should never lose your temper like that." And then there's another direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna's. And similar kind of incident happens where other random dudes are criticizing Sri Ramakrishna to his face. And this person is very soft by nature, very timid, doesn't say anything. He's like, water off a duck's back, who cares? Sri Ramakrishna won't care. He's beyond these things. So, and then he comes to Sri Ramakrishna later and tells him what happened. Sri Ramakrishna scolds him and says, "Hey, why didn't you speak up? I'm your guru, come on." So why? Because that person, his weakness is he's too timid, overly passive, you know? And whereas Niranjanandaji, his problem was the temper. And so is there a contradiction in his teaching? No. The point is he's tailoring his teachings to the individual he's speaking to. I think that's the way to think about it. All right, thank you, everyone. Okay, we got one last question. Yeah, Mike, can you bring the mic over? And then we'll wrap it up.
It's not so much a question, but
Yeah.
it really makes sense. Everything ties together in your lecture. Like we're starting out with not being attached, you know, but practically moving through the world, seeing God in everything, like seeing God in your work or in your children. And then you're ending with like the ultimate, you know, Kabir saying the ultimate form of God is just energy, and the personal forms, or that's not the exact word, but that it's the unmanifest, and he thinks that's superior. And the way I think of it is like just the 0 point field, like it's the 0 point field. Everything comes out of it, everything comes back into it, and it's just, if we're really going to look at this as Maya and the play of form, then it has to be a game, and it has to be play, and part of not being attached is seeing it as God in different forms and just experiencing it.
Yeah.
And so you're not clinging to one thing or the other, because you're like, it all came from the 0 point field, just to use a physics
that's a nice way of putting it, But I think what you're articulating is more Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta perspective than Kabir's. But maybe I'm not being fair to Kabir, and there are some people in the audience, online especially, who know Kabir quite well. So you can correct me if you think I'm wrong. But so, and I gave a previous gospel class called "Was Kabir a Vijnana Vedanta?"
Yeah,
so
he
it's
probably
possible
didn't
that
mean
you
to
can
be,
read Kabir as a
but
Vijnani, but
but I agree with what you just said. Like, I just feel like the lecture kind of brings it all together. Like, you really can love people and love your work and love money and love countries or love whatever you love as just the experience of God while we're here.
And we of course, when we say that, I think you're right, but then we also have to be careful about the dangers of that practice.
Right, obviously.
And overly quickly trying to see the divine in everyone as a way of, I mean, it's a way, it can easily be justifying bhoga in the name of yoga.
Right,
which means
but like to pull
justifying
back
worldly
from
enjoyment.
everything, you're not going to evolve. Like, you got to just chew, right?
Yeah, they're different approaches,
And I mean, there's danger in that, but like the danger of not experiencing is like not passing through it. Like
That's what exactly, is that you have to pass through the end of enjoyments before you feel that spirit.
Anyway, I liked the shape of the lecture. It all makes sense.
Thank you so much. And this is this outstanding question then that you can try to answer in the comment section. Do you think that Kabir here in the song that I read out to you and that Sri Ramakrishna is partially quoting, is he voicing the Vijnana Vedanta or something a little bit more sectarian or one-sided? That's the question. Is he putting the other three Ramas on a lower footing? It seems to me that he's explicitly saying that in the last 4 lines, which are not quoted by Sri Ramakrishna. But you can argue with me. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. There's a lot there from the Anand